Hello, everyone. You're watching Speak Your Mind with Dr. Ryger, our weekly series on the psychology of societal change. I'm Neza Alawi, founder and CEO of Join Mayshad, the New York-based company that empowers women on a daily basis. I'm here today with Jan Mercer-Dam, our VP of Development, and Dr. Risa Ryger, our clinical psychologist and investor in Mayshad. Hello, Jan.
Hi, Neza. Happy Monday. Happy Monday, everyone. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Jan Mercer-Dam, the Vice President of U.S. Development. Join Mayshad is an ecosystem of brands for women by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women, professionally and personally. Please make sure to check us out at joinmayshad.com for all of our upcoming program. We offer over 10 different touch points for professional, highly accomplished women to stay connected with each other each and every week. Please also make sure to type in your questions in the chat box and join our YouTube channel. For more information, again, please contact us at joinmayshad.com. Thanks, Neza, for hosting us.
Thank you. Today's show is about women's relationship with money, the emotional nature of money on household stress, and the psychological impact of the intergenerational wealth transfer. Dr. Ryger, thank you for hosting us every week on those fabulous topics that let us deep dive in societal change. The first question to you is, we know that one can now seek the services of many types of therapies. There are couples, marriage therapies, sex therapies, loss of life therapies, career counselors. But what about financial therapy? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. Hi, Neza. Hi, Jan. Welcome everyone who's here live. And for those of you who are tuning in, I'm so delighted to be sharing this topic with you because women and money is a complicated relationship. And part of what happens here has to do with feelings of self-worth and how women really bring their family of origin experiences to self-worth. As to your question about therapy and finances, that in working with people, it's so important to assess self-worth. And one of the ways that we need to do that, and we need to keep finances in the treatment, whether it's specifically psychotherapy or whether there's an aspect of theracoaching that happens, which is a kind of a melange of the two, that keeping finances in is really very, very important, in that people will often talk more freely about their sex lives than they will about their finances. And so it's like this taboo topic. And at the same time, it's something that affects us so fundamentally in many respects, because we need to have money. Money is the means by which we're able to support ourselves and survive. And so in therapy or in a form of theracoaching or a good coaching, that it's very important that money is part of this, and that oftentimes your family background, what you've heard about money, what are the kinds of imprints that you've had about money growing up? And one of the first ways to start is by asking, well, what did you hear? What did you hear about money growing up? What's some of the common, the common phraseology that we've heard? And, poor as a church mouse, filthy rich. I mean, we've heard all sorts of very odd terminology when it comes to money. And not only that, but there's also how we have heard about how we as individuals, women as individuals, have managed or not managed money. Whether you're thrifty, whether you don't really spend for yourself, and that's considered to be a really good thing, or whether you're considered to be financially irresponsible, that there are so many aspects to money and how we sit with it, how we live with it, how we go about earning it, how we feel we're worth or we're not worth whatever money we are in, we have access to. And then, of course, there's the other component, which you mentioned, which is the transgenerational, kind of transmission of wealth as well. So all of these aspects really need to be taken into account and need to be looked at in terms of any type of therapeutic intervention.
And Dr. Ryger, yes, women used to really be kept away from the family finances. They, even when they lived a wealthy life, they didn't have to deal with daddy's meetings, board meetings, and meetings linked to the financial talks. And it was more generally the boys that we would be put in this. And if we look at the next 20 to 30 years, there's about $68 trillion dollars that will be put in the hands of money through spouses' death, inheritance, and wealth transfer. Where do we stand as women? Do you feel that out there we have enough counseling to to support us with managing this? And I'm not talking about the financial counseling, but the psychological counseling to be able to be okay with it and to not feel wrong with having tough money talks without feeling guilty about it.
That's such an important perspective to take into account here because, historically, women have been the nurturers. And so, and one of the things that we also know is oftentimes, not only with money, but with time, how we allocate money, how we allocate time. Oftentimes we are at the bottom of the list. There is so much else that comes to the top of the list and pushes us. We choose, and it doesn't even feel like a choice sometimes because it feels so in keeping with who we are, in keeping of who we should be, and in keeping with the type of role of, being selfless, which is an interesting term in terms of selfish. So that basically for women, if we think about just the language for a moment, there's no way to have a self given the language that's available to us in many respects. So either we're selfish, which means that we're actually taking ourselves into account. And so by doing that, we're really putting this priority on ourselves that is not acceptable, because that's what selfish means. When we think of a selfish person, we don't think of someone who is, kind or giving, or, it's all about yourself. Now, the other side of that coin is the selfless, the selfless person. Well, what does that mean? The selfless person means that you don't have a self. And so if you don't have a self, or if you do have a self, then you're just completely enamored with yourself and you're uncaring. Where does that leave women in terms of some sort of ground that's acceptable? And we don't, historically really have that kind of grounding of what would be language, what would be a way that it's say, hey, I'm a human being, therefore I have a self. Now, I've got to have another option between either not having a self or being completely consumed with myself. And I don't know that, I think it may be incumbent upon us, and maybe the three of us, to come up with some terminology about that. We've talked about self-care, and self-care is not the same as self-indulgence, but when oftentimes our basic identity it is involved with nurturance in some way, whether it's nurturance of, we can, think fundamentally, of your kids or of your friends or whatever that may be, that there's this idea that your boundary about yourself really needs to encompass other people, and so that you can become a blur. And it's a hard space to navigate. So to be able to have a self and to take care of that self, and then what does it mean to put value on that self? Because one of the important aspects about money also has to do with self-worth.
Jan, I want to ask you a question.
You both can ask me a
It's
question.
So many questions.
Yes. So, Jan, what are still the stereotypes that are associated to women who have money and young women who have money? I think it's always presumed that it's inherited, and do you feel that, we can expect a 35-year-old man to have made massive money, but when a 35-year-old woman arrive with a certain lifestyle, we presume that it was paid by someone.
Oh, absolutely, Nez. I think that's incredibly true in our country. And there is I want to go back to also something that Risa said too, which I really think ties this all nicely together, is that, we think of time as money, right? Like how many times, Risa, going back to like, money doesn't grow on trees, like all the sayings that we grew up with in terms of our own socialization process. I think there's also, I've heard many, many people say over the course of my life, time is money. When we think of, what we really value in this country, and knowing that time's a big part of that. The irony of that is that for working women, white collar and blue collar, we know that time and money are very different things, right? And so I think that we as a gender give and give and give and give, but historically haven't equated our own time with money. Risa, to your point around how we're nurturers, we take care of others, often at the expense of not taking care of ourselves, and not monetizing the way in which we even think about like the amount of hours we give as volunteers or to a charity or to helping others. And how many of us out there, and I know that we're, us three are probably guilty of this, and I know that probably many of our viewers are as well, is that, we give a lot away for free rather than thinking through that business lens of really understanding how much are we really giving away for free? And, would men do that on the flip side of that as well? And as I think to your point, it's absolutely true. I think that there's a perception here in this country that if you work really hard, you will achieve. But that philosophy, I think, has largely been afforded to men, as opposed to the perception that if a woman shows up with money or shows up with class or shows up with an edge or shows up with whatever that persona is, that it must have come from her parents. And I think that holds true for all generations. I think what now we see that's a little bit different is that Gen Zs and millennials are showing up in very different ways. So they may not look the part as a wealthy elite. And I think that just in the sense of the optics of the external appearance, you may not envision or may not hold the same assumptions or the same stereotypes or the same viewpoints of someone who shows up in a t-shirt and jeans, who may be incredibly wealthy, but may have earned that on her own, right? And so I think there's some generational differences that we'll see along the ways that will really permeate ongoing in our society. But I think it's fascinating, and it's always, well, who did she marry? Or, oh, she must have married up, or, right? It's terrifying, but it still exists today in New York and in other metropolitan areas as well.
And the term gold digger, was it primarily associated to women, or was it a multi-gender thing?
Oh, gold diggers.
Women.
Historically, gold diggers were women. I know, and of course it was the men who literally dug the gold.
Exactly.
And which is interesting. But then once they had it, then the women took their shovels out and went to dig into that. But there's this kind of this nefarious notion about this, and versus women who can stand on their own, and they stand on their own, but they don't have to have the same kinds of symbols of wealth, right? That you can still wear a T-shirt from Old Navy, and not to besmirch Old Navy, but that you can have that 4th of July $5 T-shirt from Old Navy, and some jeans or whatever else, and you don't have the symbol, the whispering of that handbag, the items that are identifiable, that places you, or it gives you the illusion of being placed in some sort of financial segment, right? So what's the bag look like? What does the clothes look like? What do the shoes look like? And so in absence of that, and in absence of these other kinds of ways of tapping in. You don't know. You don't know. So just to have the assumption that that person is, clearly making it, trying to make it on their own and obviously struggling very much so. I mean, what does it look like to have a woman who really does make it on her own? What is that image? What is that image? Who are those people? Who do we look to for that? And there are a lot of people who are really not interested in being public about it in these sorts of ways, and nor do they have to. Nor do they have to. These are very, very personal decisions, and it really brings into play, I think. And then I'm going to, we'll go on to the next question, but it very much brings into play, how do you define success? What does success look like for you?
And for sure, a lot of things have changed, and so there is a psychology that doesn't follow. But in terms of society, women have worked, they've made businesses. Of course, in numbers, we cannot tell you at Join Mayshad that it's enough. It's like 10% of what it should be. So we still need to work on pushing women forward and so on. But there are success stories out there, and it takes us to another question within the couple. Then that woman that made it all the way to the top and that has been successful, two things, there is motherhood, and where does motherhood stands on that path, and then where does a couple stand on that path, and are we totally liberated to be with someone that makes less money, when it is complete someone who's younger, when in the typical male stereotype it's completely okay to be rich and older and be with someone that doesn't have money and she's pretty and young. And so I feel that there are still a lot of things that women are struggling with, um, at all levels, whether they're not successful and they still need to do a lot of work to be successful, or they're successful and then they have the other problems.
As well as really coming to their, people coming to their own definition of what success means for them. And so the question arises is your success, and we of course understand this to, at least intellectually, to not be the case. Is your success tied to the numbers on your paycheck? And so if you have 2 times, that number, does that mean that you're twice as successful? And one aspect of all of this really has to go back to, I think, on a fundamental level, Jan and Neza and our Mayshad community listening in or watching this later, that it really comes back to the freedom. And I think that this is profoundly important, that when we really look at, well, what definitions of success are we carrying around with us? Like bricks in a backpack, right? And what definitions of success do we really want to incorporate into our lives? And so to be able to ask ourselves, not what is it that we heard that success should look like, but really, given who we are, and especially perhaps even at this time of COVID and us having been, shut in and staying at home for our own safety, and the safety of others, that it gives us even more so that opportunity to ask ourselves, well, what is really important to me? What's really important to me? What do I really need in my life? And not only in this time, but at other times, at any time. Are you carrying around, are you living by somebody else's picture of success? Now, what we thought might have been successful maybe when we were 15 or 20 or 30, that may change over time as well. And that's a great thing. But it's so important to really go deep in yourself and really courageously take a look and ask yourself, what is it? What does success really mean to me? What does success look like? I mean, there was someone we had on the show who was a Pinterest kind of person, right? And so if you did a Pinterest board for yourself, right, of what does success look like? What would be on that board? What would it look like? Whose board are you walking around with, in your head?
And I think, Risa, also we need to also place this in the larger context of not just what's happening right now in this moment in time of great unemployment, great pivoting in individual careers, the incredible transfer of wealth that Neza mentioned, but also what's happening under the household when you may have different people with different money mindsets living under the same household. And some of these tension points are coming out even more clearly now than what they may have before, because we're in a heightened state of anxiety and crisis and stress. And are you seeing that in the work that you're doing too, in the sense of, in those moments and times where both individuals in a couple may not be on the same page with going through the exercise that you mentioned around, really truly asking yourself what's important, what's vital, what does success look like? What do you do when those values don't intersect at the right moments at the right times?
So another difficult conversation to have is really for a couple that each of them, and they have a discussion together. And if there's a commitment to try to really take a look at this, that you start with, what have you heard about money? What have you grown up with? What are your money beliefs? What is your money mindset? And the mindset is, it's like a filter with which we see things and which we hear things and we act. And we have to have real clarity and be able to identify what our money mindset is. And that when we've grown up, I mean, there were all sorts of things that we heard about money. And in couples, there are couples where, one person grew up with more of financial opportunity. One person grew up with less financial opportunity. And so it has very different meanings for people. And that doesn't mean that necessarily has to be problematic, but it's what happens with those differences. How can they come together in a way that will work better? How can there be partnership and perhaps balance or understanding, compassion, kindness, and connectedness, so that it's not necessarily that all of a sudden, you got born and your idea was that if you didn't have, I don't know, whatever amount of money in the bank account, that you were in a troubled situation, versus somebody who has a different idea about it. You weren't just born with that. Somehow or other, this messaging, these ideas, this information, this mindset, this kind of these little things that you hear, when you're kids, they're the conversations that you're in, but the most important conversations are the ones that you overhear. Those are the best conversations, because that's where you really get the lowdown. And it's so funny as kids. I mean, I'm sure, Jan, and as I see you both smiling, that we all, it's like, well, we're just going to kind of listen in. And all of a sudden you get that little nugget, you hear that thing. And at that moment, even as a kid, you've heard something very basic that will stay with you. And even if it doesn't stay with you in an overt way, like, oh, I remember when Aunt Bertha said, whatever, that it still is with you. And so as a couple, you have an opportunity to really unpack it and take a look at it, not in a negative way, but in a way of an exploration. And, this is one of the things that we talk about here, is that how do we go about an exploration in a non-judgmental way versus like going right for the judgment. Like, I can't believe he could think that way. I can't believe she could think that way. How could she possibly? How could he possibly? And that when we go to those sorts of spots, that it's we can really experience a lot of growth. And for women who have not had money, and if they're in more established, in more, let's say, traditional roles where there's one person who's going out working and the woman is at home, which is a massive job. Let's not be confused about that. It's a massive job. It's a big job. And if we were to, I'm sure there are other studies that talk about what it would cost if you had to replace, the woman at home. And she should make a whole lot of money. But what happens often is that because of whatever type of mental orientation, that there's also can be a feeling that, I really shouldn't spend that much. Let me put in, to your point, Jan, about time is money and what's my time worth. Let me put in another 2 hours, like exploring this to see if I can save, $15. And there's nothing wrong with saving $15. But there's also the idea of, is my time valuable? Am I valuable? What value do I put on being the organizer, being the CEO, the CFO of the household in terms of organizing different aspects of the home? And that it's a massive role of organization and coordination.
We talked, Dr. Ryger, to a woman whose partner at a VC. She comes from 3 generations of venture capitalists, and so she was put in that for 3 generations. But she tells you that when she's raising funds for the VC, and she goes to uber wealthy women who have inherited, and she pitches them the project that she carries, and the project that the VC invests on. Well, those women will host her over and over and over for tea and coffee, but they will very rarely make the move. And these are the same women who will give to charity and who will be like huge philanthropists. So something for them is right about being a philanthropist, because in front of society, it makes you feel that it is something that you can do as a woman, but not invest, because that's not what she does. That's probably what her brother is allowed to do, or maybe her son. So those things are really embedded in the psychology and need to be changed, because I think that those same women who are doing the philanthropy, if they were investors, they would be investing in women-led projects. They would be sitting on boards and asking for more women to be on boards. They would be asking for gender equality within the companies. So women need to understand that they need to be out there, especially the ones that have that access to the wealth, and stop feeling shy about it and start using that money. And the impact is not only through nonprofit, it is through empowering female entrepreneurs as well.
It is another place of really just breaking through. It's a different kind of glass ceiling. And that's a glass ceiling. We hear about glass ceilings in corporations, but the most important glass ceiling to break is the ones that we need to break inside of ourselves. And what are the limited beliefs that we carry about ourselves? What are the limited roles that we carry about ourselves? And and lots of people may not know, what are the nuts and bolts? What do I need to know in order to invest? How do I go about doing that? How do I educate myself? And the thing is that at this point in time, you can find out. It doesn't have to be such a mystery. You can find out, and then be an intelligent and a knowledgeable investor, and be able to use what you have to do good in the world. And doing good, doesn't only mean giving to charity. Giving to charity is great, and everyone should be philanthropic with whatever it is that they can, whether it's philanthropic with your time, with your expertise, with your money, whatever it is. We all have an opportunity to be philanthropic. But to shift a little bit into, into businesses, women owned and run businesses that in fact make money is also a tremendous way of contributing. And to let women who have the ability, who have the talent, who have the skills, who have the vision, and not only have the vision, but they're able to take the vision and work to implement it, and that you could be an important part of that implementation. And what is then the messaging? I mean, when we talk about charity, we talk about ripple effects, right? But there's also the importance of helping to engage with women own and run and started businesses. And what's the ripple effect of that? I mean, if you want to talk about generational impact, what's the generational impact of that? Of the women who are doing it, the women who are the generation above seeing them do it, the women who are, rising adults, young adults, children, seeing women like start it out and go with it and make something of it. I mean, if you want to talk about ripple effect and you want to talk about empowerment, that is a lane that is available. You don't have to be in a whole lot of traffic. It's a lane that's available, but you need to, and it's okay to get on that road.
And Dr. Ryger, I would like also to talk about motherhood and how, yes, a woman making money. Oh, yes, a mother needs to make money if she can't feed her children, and she needs to go out and to feed her children. But for a woman to want to be a successful entrepreneur when she has that base of being able to feed her children and school them, oh, that's bad. Okay, that becomes selfish. It's like, and so yes, that image of a woman who's fighting for her children because she doesn't have a choice and she doesn't have a man to feed, but to leave children and go to work because we have a career, because we want more than what we had for ourselves, for our children, and we have this vision. There is a lot of guilt out there that is still very much present.
There is.
Yeah.
And what is it that we teach our children? I mean, what is it that we're teaching our children? Are we teaching our children that only through necessity is it okay to work? Is that the only reason to work as a woman with a uterus that has developed children? I mean, does that then relegate you to having to be at home and versus not having an option to? And therefore, if you're a woman who has not had children, is it then okay? Is that kind of a green light? Well, you didn't have kids, so go have a career. And so there are these fundamental questions of what is it? Is it that we build them better? I don't know. We're building them, so therefore, we've made our commitment, and now we have to live with our commitment. And so it's this very odd kind of notion about what is womanhood. What is womanhood? What are models of motherhood? Can you be a good mother and have a career that you love? Or can you be a good mother and you're out working, but you really don't like your job and you really don't, you wish you couldn't be, you didn't have to be there. And for someone, look, this is all about choice. And there isn't a one way. There isn't one way. But it's important that the ways that are available are actually available. And this is where we have, where we have to do a lot of self-checking with beliefs. And what is it that we believe? Do we believe do we really believe in our heart of hearts that we can be, since we're here and we're talking about women and you're asking the question, can we really be good moms and also have jobs and careers that when we talk about it with our children, that it isn't like, oh yeah, I'm back from work, versus I had such a great day today. And this was so interesting. And I'd love to share that with you. Of course, you wouldn't talk that way to your kid because you have to package it so that they want to hear it and everything. But that it doesn't have to be presented as something of toil. That no matter what you do, no matter what job you have, that there's a personal integrity and a personal integrity that you can bring into any job that you do. And, years ago when I was working as an au pair, part of my job was to do some cleaning. And is it my favorite thing? I can tell you, no, it's not my favorite thing, but, whatever the integrity is, you bring your integrity to what you do. You bring your integrity. This is a part of your personhood. And you take, whatever your feeling of excellence and doing a job well and that kind of commitment. And that really has to do with your feelings of self-worth.
Risa, I've learned something new about you today. This is amazing. This is a perfect time to go to a couple of questions from our audience because it blends really nicely in, if that's okay with both of you, blends really nicely into the conversation about motherhood and children and money. The first question is, what happens when two parents are teaching conflicting concepts of money? What recommendations do you have for overcoming those points of tension?
Sit down and have a talk with the person you're living with. And get clear about what your approach is. And that's really an important piece. And it doesn't mean that you have to be point by point in agreement. That's absolutely not necessary. I mean, if we had to be point by point in agreement with parenting, that would be disastrous. And that it's also great for kids to hear some differing views. But at the same time, it can become very confusing, and having a clarity together about, well, what are the values that we want to teach? What are the values that we want to give to you, not only through our words, but that you're seeing it in our behavior, in our actions, and that transmission of information, just like we were talking before about kids hear and they listen to the conversations that they shouldn't hear. So think about what your children are hearing if there's this sort of disparate orientation. And you don't have to agree, but what is it that you want to message? And have the conversation and get an understanding of why it is, what is it that's fundamentally different, and how can you bridge it enough?
This is such an interesting question here. This really speaks to the paradoxical nature by how, under the circumstances under which we educate youth, how do schools really handle money, given the fact that teachers are typically paid low salaries and yet in charge of a curriculum of teaching kids how to become responsible adults?
That goes in with how do you kind of orient yourself in the world. And that one of the things, and I'm so glad this question is being asked, because the one thing that isn't taught in school enough is when we hear about the ABCs and the apostrophe S, right? That has to be self. That part of education is about children learning about themselves and being able to develop themselves, not only in terms of their math skills and their reading abilities, but who they are in the world. And that part of understanding differences, part of understanding necessarily that people who don't have enough money, what's the story that you've heard about that? What stories have you heard about that? If we go back to sort of the common different kinds of expressions that we hear about money. What stories have you heard about people who have money? What stories have you heard about people who don't have money? And that it becomes important as part of the education to be able to help children understand, what this is all about and what our values are as human beings. And having the better t-shirt doesn't make you the better person.
And at the same time, I think it's fascinating that, teachers, at least here in the United States, public school teachers are drastically underpaid, right?
Yes.
And most of those positions are actually filled by women until you get to the administrative level. And then there's much more of a gender equality present. And so I'm wondering, just, given that fact, when we look at, the fact that women are making, 80 cents to every man's dollar. And if you're a Black woman or a Latina woman, the numbers are far, far worse. So in some of those professions that are typically underpaid and also typically feminine, filled by women, what messages are we sending to youth? And is this moment in time a moment in time to actually change some of that? Like, do you actually see positive change coming from this moment in time where some of those professions that are really largely responsible for educating the youth of tomorrow, the next generation, into leaders, into managers, into business owners, there'll be some sort of larger societal change?
For parents who are trying to homeschool their children right now, there is a whole other level of appreciating teachers and how hard a job it is. I mean, if you think about it, your kid is with that teacher for more awake hours during the day than with you. And this person has a tremendous responsibility to, and I've lectured to teachers, and when I've done that, I've asked them, well, let's talk about what your role is. What do you have to do as a teacher? So you have to teach, you have to make sure they're developing, you have to watch for every food allergy known to mankind. There's like so many different aspects to just getting through a day with teachers, and that to respect the difficulty of what it is to manage 20 or 30 different personalities who have to be together every day for 8 hours a day, and that you're in charge of doing that, especially at the beginning, before kids are, interdepart-mentalized, that it is a profession that requires such dedication and interest and creativity to be able to turn that classroom into a place where hopefully children want to learn, that it's, they need to know 2 + 2, but also that's a person, the teacher is a person who's going to hopefully help your child be interested in learning, be interested in being curious, be interested in wanting to know more and finding out more. And that one of the most important pieces of teaching is helping students learn how to think. Forget about just like plugging in the factual information, but that in a profound way, this is helping people learn how to think. And there's so much more respect given to teachers at this point. And I sure hope that continues when kids at one point in time are really going to be back in the classrooms. Great question.
Nessa, I have a question for you. So I would love for our audience to hear your perspective, given the fact that you were born in another country, spent much of your socialization years outside the U.S., have lived back and forth in many different countries, including here in different periods of times, and now you're here full time. Talk to us about your perceptions of the psychological nature of women and money, and how does it differ on a global level from your global perspective?
Well, Dr. Ryger, when you talked earlier about terms that were allocated, like guilt terms that were allocated to money, I was thinking that from my international culture in Morocco, but also in France and here, it's like when women and money, there is always something sneaky about it. She's like, you say, oh my God, she's a smarty. She made a lot of money. And you wouldn't say that about a man. And so she's, there is always something kind of like dodgy about that, like cute, but, and like, and so, and then, yes, and then ambition in France. Ambition is such a negative word. And so you would say that a woman is ambitious, and which is such a negative word. And so why would you say that a woman is ambitious? It's because she's just alert. She's that type of woman in a seated, very formal dinner, who asks questions, who talks, who has an opinion, and you would say about that woman that she's ambitious. So yes, society in all level, and Europe had his history of being very backward in terms of women's empowerment a long time ago. Since the 60s, they've done their walk forward. Societies and religions and the formal setups of societies have always put women backward. And again, when you deep dive into the writings of religions and the spiritual part of it, there is nothing that says that women shouldn't work, that women have to be backward, that women should be at home. But it was, again, it's like AI being set up by man. It's those writings were also translated and described by men. So things have evolved. Movements have helped women evolve. Changes of constitutions have given more rights, but sometimes, and it's so interesting here to see that we're talking about the psychology of societal change, is that a movement will lead to a change in laws, but then society will put much more pressure against the change, because the psychology will take much more time to follow. Laws and rules will change before the psychology will change.
Well, that's a great point, and that sometimes change needs to happen from the outside in, and as an option to happening from the inside out. And so, and would it be great if people really looked inside themselves and said, gee, well, I'm talking about a woman, I'm thinking about her, or I'm saying things, and it's like, God, she's really, she's a go-getter. Which there's a certain kind of terminology, and I love what you were saying because it just nails it. That somehow, in Europe, if a woman making money, that it wasn't quite you didn't do it quite in an illegal way, but it was shady. That there had to be something not above board. That it wasn't like you were a respectable, a good business person, and your smarts and your experience and the way you were able to think really got you on the road to where you wanted to go. But that there's all of this undermining of, well, she must really be no, or it's like having mosquitoes in your ears,
Dr. Ryger, it was also judgment made by other women.
Oh, yes.
The ones who were the gossipers in the room. It was other women that didn't have the courage to take on that type of attitude. And so laws will change, and I'll give you just the example of Morocco. The current king came into power about 17, 18 years ago when his father died, and he was witnessing a lot. He has sisters and cousins, and he wanted to support women, so he changed. He created a new law to support women and divorce, and for women to have their children. And so, but even though those laws were changed and made, the inequality stayed. And so because women would still be in a very abusive relationship, and they wouldn't dare divorcing because they lost all their social status. And so whether even here, you see mothers will judge other hardworking mothers in schools, in private schools, and they will bully other women, and also in those social classes where women don't need to work, they will always look down at a woman who wants to work. And so I like to always put a fraction of the responsibility to women. I always say also in the Arab world, I say, well, all those men who are being abusive are the sons of moms who are very present in the life of those men. And so if the mother tells you that it's okay to be harsh and tough, and they're the ones who tells him like, be tough with your wife. Don't let her do that. She will take power. She'll do that. And it's so unfair, but it's just because that mother didn't stand up for herself as a little girl, as a wife, as so on. And she looks at that daring wife who was educated and who's a doctor at someone who shouldn't have more freedom than she had.
It takes a lot of kind of some introspection, some courage, some compassion, and finding a place of feeling good about yourself. I mean, but let's be clear that those women, those moms, have a lot of power. They have a lot of power. Let's make no mistake about that they wield a lot of power. And so what is it like to be a powerful woman and be with another powerful woman? And that's one of our questions, right? Is that, does your power get diminished? Is there some way to coexist? And I think that if we kind of distill this in some respects, if we ask ourselves, well, when we meet someone, and we all do this, we all do it. It's like, what's your assumption about that person? You meet someone and in a nanosecond, you create, it's not even you consciously do, but you have all of these assumptions about this person. It just happens. It floods into your head. You have 1,000 different checklists that, your brain is just going through. And that's going to happen. But where we need to not only be kind to ourselves, but also to really give that kindness to other women, is that we need to check ourselves. We need to become aware of what are the checklists that are going on. What are the assumptions we're making about another woman? And is that really a track we want to continue? And so even if we go through the checklist, because our brain has done it on automatic pilot, what are we going to do with that information now? And do we really want to buy into whatever those assumptions are? And that all of us, in different ways, we have all had our struggles. Everyone has had their struggles in different kinds of ways. There's something. There are things in everyone's life that they have to deal with or manage or get through. Whether they do it in a conscious way or an unconscious way, that's another story. But that we really are compelled, we must really challenge those assumptions and decide whether or not we want to go forth with those assumptions about that person, or whether we want to sit back for a moment and find out more. And then we could play a little game, right? It's like, well, what did I think and what is real and true? And just see how much that gets matched. I mean, not only do we necessarily, cast negative aspersions to someone, negative assumptions, but sometimes we just kind of will, for another reason, depending on how the person presents themselves, also like give them a lot of positive assumptions that may also not fit. So it's becoming aware of the assumptions, being able to acknowledge them, be interested and curious about our assumptions, and then decide how do we want to handle this? And by what we do and how we treat each other, how are we affecting, what is the ripple? Each one of us creates our own ripple. Every one of us, we create our own ripple. And so what's the ripple effect that you're having? And is that the ripple effect that you really want to have? Is that really how you want to be in connection with other women? Is that really the impact? Is that the impact? Is that the piece that you want to put out into the world that other people are going to experience? Is that commensurate with who you are and how you feel or want to be in this world and what you give out to the world?
Thank you, Dr. Gogetter. Those sessions are always so passionate. Definitely, if women do have power to influence, and if every single woman chose to become a mentor in her own circle, be a mentor to the next generation, be a mentor to people who are weaker than you, we could really change society and the world over a decade, because women are transmitters and they do care of a better world. If they're not sticking to other influences that take them away from that, they would naturally care. In wars, women always cared. In famine, women cared. And so yes. So call to action. Let's all look at ourselves, our life, and pick up people around us that we feel that we could lift up and mentor, and we can do it.
So we just got a message from David.
Yeah.
We just got a message to mention that I have a resource for people, and they can get that at drr at expertinchange.com. And I would love to be able to support you in your journey with that resource. And, as always, it is such a tremendous, not only a pleasure, but an honor to sit with you and to be with the Mayshad community.
Thank you, Dr. Ryger. Thank you, Jan.
Thanks, Neza. Thanks, Risa. Thanks, everyone, for being with us today. Make sure, please, please, please check us out at joinmayshad.com and join us tomorrow for our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion show at 4 o'clock and our Women in Money show at 4 o'clock on Thursdays, Eastern Standard Time. Thanks, everyone.